Hi, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I am here with Susan, as always.
Hello there.
And special guest, Abby Covert. Hello, Abby.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Abby is an independent information architect. She runs her own business, Abby VIA. The author of a book, which hopefully we'll talk about, which is How to Make Sense of Any Mess, and a teacher at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Now, before we get going, I just want to do our standard little introduction. If you're new to the podcast, feel free to listen to the old episodes. They're really great. If you're not new, feel free to tell all your friends. You can tweet Susan at, what's your handle?
At the Brain Lady.
Abby, is there any place you'd like people to send compliments to you?
Oh, compliments are always encouraged. You can reach me on Twitter at AbbyVIA or send me an email.
And if you have any complaints about Abby, feel free to email them to info@theteamw.com. So we'll take the gruff for you there. Our website is again theteamw.com. So Abby's pretty cool. We met Abby when we were doing our Stockholm trip. She was also a speaker at the conference of fame and fortune, because out of all the speakers, Al Gore liked her best. So
it's true. He mentioned the phrase information architecture. How many times, Abby? Because you were counting.
It was 11 times.
11 times.
Oh,
yeah.
11 times.
So Abby is an information architect. I guess I don't know. An evangelist. Would that be the correct term?
Sure. Yeah. I sort of think about it as being more like a missionary.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about what it is. I know I was vaguely aware of it before hearing Abby's talk in Stockholm. Susan is a little more aware of it just because of, she has more history in the field. And I'm sure a lot of you listening have never heard of it before, but it's a cool idea. And so we'll run the kind of start about what it is. Anything else that I've missed?
Oh, no, I think that's good.
Okay.
I think we're ready to
Okay.
dive into the mess and IA of Abby's brain.
So Abby, how about you just give the normal listener, Joe the truck mechanic, who listens every day while he's maybe a little higher than that, somewhere in between a usability professional and Joe the truck mechanic, of what is information architecture.
Well, luckily, I think IA actually applies to all of those job titles that might be in between the usability professional and Joe the truck driver. So
Great.
I would say that information architecture is the way that we arrange the parts of something to make sense as a whole. So for Joe, he's probably at some point in his time mechanicking trucks looked at instruction manuals for how an engine comes together, has a vocabulary of what all the pieces and parts of the truck are called, and has an understanding of how those parts work together in order to serve the need of driving a truck. From a usability professional, they generally will work within an organization, and that organization will have terms for things and also structures that organize those things so they're understandable both internally by people that work there, as well as externally, assuming that they are working with some form of end user. So information architecture encapsulates what we call things and how we arrange them so that they make sense for whatever our intention is.
And so when you look at it from that, the title makes a lot more sense.
Which title?
Information architecture. Literally creating architectures
of information. Yeah.
It sounds vague at first, but then you're like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think it sounds more vague to people who work closer to the space than it does to people outside. Like I do get a lot of joy out of asking people outside of our industry about what they think it means. So rather than I always get so what do you do? And I'm an information architect, and people usually say something like, "Wow, that sounds cool. What is that?" And before I answer them with my words, I like to ask them well, what do you think it is? And generally, they're able to get pretty darn close. I mean, not down to the nuts and bolts of how I practice it, but generally people were like, oh, is that like how you arrange information, like for things like computer systems. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty close. So, yeah, I think it's pretty understandable just as a concept
You
once
know,
you
that's
start to think about
funny.
it.
It's funny that you would say that, people who are in, let's say, in the field of design, or people who do user experience work or usability work would have a harder time describing it than people who are new to it. But I get that. I get that. And I think maybe part of that is because, there's so much, I think, confusion about terminology
Yeah.
in, quote, if we're talking about, let's just say user experience, our field, and which is so ironic because in your book, which I just love your book, by the way, I'm holding it, and you guys probably just heard that loud noise I made, which was me actually rifling through pages without, accidentally. And it's called How to Make Sense of Any Mess. And it's a small book. It's really accessible and readable, which, you would think if you're writing a book about information architecture, that would be what someone would do, right? They'd be able, an information architect would be able to write a really, really great, well-organized book. But there's actually a lot there. Well, there are some information architecture books out there that are pretty hard to read and pretty ponderous. But yours is great. But it's also interesting though, because you talk in the book about the idea of, one of the things you have to do with information architecture is define your terms and make sure everyone in the group or the organization or, or whoever it is you're working with, understands and agrees on the terms. And yet, ironically, in the field of user experience, I think we have a big mess
Yeah,
of
yeah, and
terms.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but yeah, frankly, the information architecture of user experience design is pretty screwed up.
Yeah, that's really
Um,
kind of strange,
but
isn't it?
I think, if you think about the reasons, it actually it resembles organizations that I work with pretty directly. Like one thing that happens is the proprietary nature of the work that we do. So, like, if you work for a company like IDEO, for example, you've got all of your branded names for all of the documentation that you create during your process. And if you go on a brief interview circuit of a bunch of, design agencies, you're going to
Yeah.
very quickly have, a whole ton of different versions of the same four-step process with different labels slapped on it. And within that, you're going to have people who have these, new and fancy job titles. But if you really get down to the nuts and bolts of what they do, it's very similar to other job titles. So I think that the proprietary nature of the work that we do is one part of it. And then also, I think that there is this unfortunate want to obfuscate the simplicity of what we do because we're selling it to clients. And I think that that happens a lot. Like the want to be smarter than your clients because they're paying you to be, and using big fancy words to get at that, I think is a strategy that a lot of people use.
Like Interphase 5.
Oh,
I,
come on, stop. That was our process we had
I don't
many
even know
years
what that
ago.
is.
That's
No, but that was brilliant.
that. I'm not saying it wasn't
Of
brilliant.
course,
I was just,
everybody's own version of it is brilliant.
Everybody had, I know. Well,
but that was a lot of years ago. A lot of years ago.
I remember though, I remember
She had her own
sitting
process.
with a dear friend of mine, however, and I mean, we spent hours, I mean, we spent days, we spent weeks sitting in my office having very heated discussions about, what the process, what the best process is and what things should be called in the process. I mean, that we really were. I mean, we were arguing at many points. But I think the other thing that goes into that, the other reason that we don't agree on terms and definitions of what we do and how we do it is because people are coming from different backgrounds, right? Because you've
Yeah.
got, like you mentioned, IDEO, so you've got like the design people and the design thinking people and that kind of design agency world. But then you've got the people who are coming at it from like I am from a behavioral science psychology point of view, and then you've got the people who came up through the ranks doing usability work, and then you've got the visual designers, right? Who are doing UX work, and then you've got people who come at it from programming and software development. So you have all these different backgrounds of people with their own terminology and their own process, and they're all actually doing very similar things, but they call it different things. I mean, I'm thinking about in your book, there's a place where and it's actually one of my favorite things you do in the book is you walk through, all the different, well, you could do a mind map, you could do a hierarchy diagram, you could do a Venn diagram, you could do a swim lane diagram, right? All the different kinds of diagrams, for instance. And, we all use these, right? Or we don't all use all of them, but we tend to have these ways of organizing and communicating information. But we have our own little process and our own little thing we call it.
Right. And I don't think that any of that is necessarily bad. Like I think that it would be a fool's errand to try to perfect the world and get everybody to standardize on what we call everything.
Really,
but yeah, absolutely. That's because things
You
are
have a
always
tired-
changing and everything else. But I feel like the more important thing is to understand when it's getting in your way and then to have the tools to look at it from a perspective of how can we standardize this.
You have a higher tolerance for mess
Oh yeah, the world is messy.
than I do.
The world is
Like the world is
absolutely
messy, and that's not to you. That's not a bad thing.
No, that's part of being human, I think. Humans are messy. We're not machines. We're not able to be reprogrammed. And I mean, one of the most complicated parts of what I do is that even though usually I'm working on the things that we're creating, ultimately the changes that I'm trying to make are the things that are coming out of people's mouths, which are determined by what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And that's the hard stuff to change. I can get a company to change a label for a certain piece of functionality, but if I can't get them to stop thinking about it in the old way that they were thinking, the chances are that label will come back at some point because it's attached to that model in their head. So kind of getting people to understand that it's not just the things that we're creating that we have to change to really have like lasting effect. It's actually deeper than that.
So how do you know though? Okay, so you have some kind of mess, right?
Yeah.
And that mess might be
any mess.
Any mess. I mean, we have all these people and they're all thinking about the process or the thing, or right? They're all thinking about it in a different way, or they're all talking about it in a different way, or whatever the mess is. How do you know how much order to try and put on that? Or is that even a goal for you? Are you trying to put any order on it? Are you trying to put like just enough order on it? Or is that not even the right question?
I think it's less about the level of order and more about the level of understanding that needs to be put on it. Because sometimes I'll work with clients and they think they want to put order on something, but really what they need to be, what would be more helpful for them would be to be educated on what they don't understand about the situation. Because there are some things that can be ordered, and then there's some things that really just it wouldn't serve them to order them.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about something like search, right? Search is a really good example of something that people struggle with kind of putting their arms around. It doesn't matter what it is your system is doing. Generally, if it's a digital system, it's going to have some level of attention to search. And I think people believe that if they could just buy the right technology, if they could just make the right results interface, if they could just tweak the input field so that it does all the fancy stuff that Google does, that they'll have what they need in terms of results. And that's actually usually not the case. Like there's something much more important going on behind the scenes when it comes to search that often needs to be dealt with before you can actually get the user part of it taken care of. And a lot of that comes down to understanding the impact of things like structured data, right? Like organizations want to solve the problem that they have, but they don't always have the ability to describe the problem in its pieces so that they can actually be tackled. So, I've walked into organizations that have gone years talking about, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if we could just fix this thing? Or wouldn't it be great if we could just fix that thing? But actually describing and breaking it down into the pieces is the harder part. That's the part that they have to admit that some things are out of their control. Some things will take an amount of time that can't be put on a Gantt chart. Some things will be immeasurable by their ROI standards that they generally use around, whatever that might be, conversion, time on site, whatever that organization is used to measuring things by. So, breaking down what the actual intention of the change is, and then breaking it into its pieces so that people can really see it. I say in the book that I think the first step to making sense of any mess is to actually admit that there is a mess and then draw a picture of it to be able to see that it is indeed a mess. So you know which parts of it you could actually affect change on.
And then to realize that it might not be a problem, that it's a mess.
Right. Yeah, like
that
folksonomies are another good example. Like you're not going
What
to
is that?
So a folksonomy is a taxonomy or a structured relationship set between pieces of content that have emerged through user generated content. So a good example of that would be like hashtags on Twitter, right? Like hashtags on Twitter were invented for a reason, being that they wanted a way to group conversations. But users have gone and done all sorts of other things with it, right? It's become kind of like a tongue-in-cheek use of internet slang to make a hashtag for something that's not about grouping a conversation. And that's sort of a mess if you look at it empirically, but it is a beloved feature of the internet. So it's not necessarily a mess that we want to change necessarily.
Yeah, see, so this is interesting because I think that I have tended to think of information architecture as, the way to create order. And now I'm realizing that that's, not really what it is. And necessarily, and that, if you think about the way the brain works, right? I mean, if you think like about neural nets and about teaching machines to learn, um, it's done in this kind of messy way. That's the way our brains actually are very messy and work best messy.
Right. But things don't exist in our brain without attachment to other things. So it's not about the hierarchy. It's about the relationship. And sometimes those relationships are like squiggly lines that don't seem to make any sense, but they're the way we make sense.
It's the why my piles of junk are organized
to you.
And someone else's piles of junk are piles of junk. And this is what I tried to tell when I was a little kid, this is why I didn't need to clean my room. But no, it needed to be objectively organized. Even though I tried to explain to them the information architecture and the neural networks of my brain were messy.
Wait. Seriously?
That's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah,
hey,
okay.
I have a question, Abby.
Sure.
This is my brilliant question time. So, so you know about deep learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And software generated neural networks.
Yep.
Google recently implemented these in their data servers for optimizing their cooling systems. So I don't know if you've heard about this, but they have huge data centers which use a lot of power, and there's lots of different ways to cool them, right? They got liquid cooling, they got air vents, they use air conditioning, and there's a little, the little fans turn on here and the little things. So Google applied their neural network to try and make it more efficient, and first time right out the bat, it found like 38%. It was 38% more efficient, just by letting the neural networks analyze all the data and figure out the most optimal solutions. So they're going to start applying this to all kinds of industries. Is there a future in which you can, you the human, group together all of the various informations in a structure that you're working with, and then give it to a piece of software that will automatically organize it into a very useful information architecture, or give you a couple of options?
I think that there's already tools that are starting to play with that idea. I mean, like if you look at a tool like Facebook, for example, that's starting to organize things for you. If you look at something like their slideshow feature, which takes all of the photos that you've taken today and assumes that if you've taken a bunch of photos in a quick succession, that they're probably related to each other, and it serves you up as like do you want to produce this as a thing to put on your wall as a moment? If you look at the way that they've used smart inputs in terms of like when you copy a link into the status update box, it knows that you're going to share a resource, and it automatically formats it to have a little thumbnail and pulls the description from the metadata of the page that you're sharing. So there's definitely, I would say that future is not far off at all. That's actually something that a lot of tools and features are starting to explore already. Whether or not there's ever going to be like, this epic machine that I'm putting all of my stuff in, I don't know. I mean, who has the business model to do something like that? I would say Google is probably the closest. And they've started to do things like that too. I mean, if you look at some of the recent innovations they've done in their inbox tool, where, if you're going on a trip, it automatically groups together your flight and your rental car and your hotel. And even when I go to speak for conferences and things, it actually knows that, oh, that is an email from the organizer that is organizing the Stockholm conference. Let's put that with the plane ticket receipt, and and then it groups it together for you. So there's definitely a lot of examples of people experimenting with that kind of thing.
So let me give you another example. So like Susan said earlier, recently what we did is we're trying to move more to a cloud-based system. So for a lot of years she had a MacBook Pro that she did a lot of her business on, and she now uses a Windows desktop, but none of that's really relevant. The relevant part is that her files were kind of all over the place, because she had files from years ago, old projects that she was on. She had new files that she was creating. There were personal files. So what we did over the last, I don't know, call it 2 weeks, even though it's probably been about, call it 11 years. There's, right? Like you just kind of put stuff in a place, and then, so she's been going through all of the files, and then we have Microsoft Office 365. So it comes with a terabyte of cloud storage. So she's just been slowly going through each folder and then reorganizing that in a system that makes sense on the cloud. And it'll upload everything. So now she has a structure that makes sense to her and what she's trying to do. And all of her files that were just kind of shoved into places are now at least in a place where you'd expect them to be. So it's been a big project. So what I could see, right, is Microsoft has a simple service that's part of Windows that you just press the button, and it will analyze all the files in the folder that you specify, and it will then come up with how would you like these files organized, right? By topic, by kind of date, by project. And it'll analyze all the files and put things in a logical order that makes sense. And if it runs into problems, just like if you do I don't know if you ever use the word recognition in Adobe. So it'll automatically turn a picture into words you can copy and paste, right? And if it has any problems, it'll be like, what is this? And then you like, okay, this is, the word, both. And then you're like, all right, moving on. So you could do that with the files too, right? And so that is a simple way in which you can have kind of machine learning, and it sends everything to Microsoft servers, which have seen 10 million trillion ways users organize their files, and knows all the tips and tricks, and then analyzes everything and can organize things for people without them having to do any work. Even though it's still kind of messy, it's a way to place things in human relations.
Yeah, I would say that the closest product that I've seen to that at this point, because I want what you just described. I don't believe it exists, but man, that would be a great opportunity for a company like Microsoft. If you're listening, Microsoft,
Call me.
Yeah, call Guthrie
or Abby.
But I think that one of the products I have seen that has done that pretty closely with photos specifically is Google Photos. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I mean, it's amazing what it can tell about a photo. I mean, all of a sudden you can type in the word sunset and it'll find everything that it thinks looks like a sunset or puppy. And it knows, that, but then it also allows you to organize it by the location that you were, or the people in the photo, or the time frame of the photo. Or the source of the photo. Did it come from your digital camera, or did it actually come from your phone? All those things. So there's definitely a lot of folks that are starting to kind of blend the ideas of information architecture and machine learning in some really interesting ways.
Abby, have you watched the TED Talk about Google neural networks?
I don't think so. That sounds like a good one, though.
Susan, do you remember the name of the person who gave that? It was a number of years ago, and it was the person at Google who was responsible for figuring out the neural networks of Google Photos. And her and her team basically...
You're talking about the woman. I talk about her in my talks. With the cat, right?
Exactly. So because they were trying to do different ways of figuring out how to do this, because Google knew what they wanted, which is exactly what you said, which is what exists today. But that's a very challenging software problem, because if you look at a picture of a cat, well, it's on a white background and it's rolled over on its belly. And if you look at another picture of a cat, it's in the grass and it's playing, with a ball, right?
Right.
A cat looks like totally different from all these other things. And so to have a computer figure out that this white cat is a cat and this kind of cat in the grass is a cat is a really challenging problem.
Right.
So she talks about how the way they organize things and the way they kind of made this neural network work. And obviously, it's working with all kinds of stuff, and driverless cars and so all sorts of things. But yeah, she talks about how they kind of did that, and it literally was for the Google Photos project. So Susan, do you have that, or I can look that up too?
No, I'm getting it. Because my files are now extremely organized.
Oh, look at that.
I was able
to find has increased.
I was able to find it while you were talking.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
See?
great efficiency gains.
What do you
Yay.
think?
I
Is
also-
that cool or what?
I
Okay.
also,
Cool.
Yeah.
to the audience, I bought a solid state drive and then ripped her hard drive out of her MacBook Pro, put it on a new drive, installed an operating system from the cloud, and then so now her computer is really fast with a solid state
Yes,
drive.
but actually I found this on my desktop, not on my MacBook
I
Pro.
know it's because it's on the cloud now. But
I know.
I'm just saying.
Okay, so this is a TED Talk called "How We Teach Computers to Understand Pictures," and the woman's name is, and I apologize for mispronouncing this. I probably am. Fei Li. So it's FEI, and then FEI is in the next word, and then LI is the last part of the name.
I'll have to watch that. That sounds really interesting.
And it has cats,
Yeah, I mean,
So
what
how
more
can you
could you
not
want?
right? A TED
Neural
Talk,
networks and cats.
neural
I mean,
networks and
I
cats.
think
Yeah.
that's a winning TED Talk
totally.
format right there.
While you guys were talking, though, I was also thinking about the fact that if you had, and I can just imagine, like listening back to this podcast episode, 5 years from now,
Oh, it's
And
gonna be so dated.
and just thinking, boy, we were just so amazed that might happen. Isn't that funny? But it's not just the information though, and the structure of the information and the pieces in it. I was going back to your example of, something just analyzing all my files and then saying, well, why don't you organize it this way? Um, I have two comments. One is because it has a lot to do with how the information is used, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that history, I would want this algorithm to not only look at the data and the types of information, but how I've been using it over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? And
Right.
and to then get insights from that. It's like, oh, she she puts together, these things, right? It's not just that it's a PowerPoint file, right?
Right.
It's that it seems to be about decisions, research on the brain or something like that. Um, I think it needs that level of sophistication too, uh, and not just the type of information it is. But what was the other thing I was going to ask though around this when I was listening to you guys talk? So you've got this idea of uh, this the machine could analyze the data and know how to organize it, or should it be more like what you were describing, Abby, where if you think about the photo idea, right, you have all these attributes, so you can group it by sunsets, you can group it by family members, you can group it, right? You can group it by location where you were when the picture was taken, right? I mean, maybe it never needs to be organized.
Like in
Maybe,
terms of a folder structure, like the
yeah,
whether or not
maybe,
whether or not hierarchy is a necessary function.
yeah. I mean, if there's enough smarts in the algorithms, the data is just there, and you don't care
Right. It's similar
how
to
it's
like
organized.
like a product like Amazon. Like it's pretty well understood that Amazon is primarily search driven and that the categories are really more like facets and less like navigational hierarchies.
Yeah,
People don't go to Amazon and go like, I'm gonna go to the books page and look at all the books. Like it doesn't
right.
work like that.
Right.
They
And
they
and
start
if
from
you
something else.
and interestingly, if you try to navigate, like, even just taking books at Amazon, I mean anything at Amazon, but using the book example, if you try to go through and look at okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at nonfiction books, and then I'm going to go pick this time. I mean, you can't find what you need.
Right. I mean, there's too many results.
Well, and also what I've called, the way I'm thinking of a category is not the way they're thinking of a category. So I
Hmm.
never, you know, like my books on Amazon are in totally bizarre categories.
Oh my gosh, mine too. I'm a really well-selling book in data storage and retrieval.
Yeah, I sell really, I,
I'm like, really?
Nothing says
Okay.
hard disk drives.
But like
what?
when I
Abby Covert.
classified it, I classified it as under philosophy in a subsection called logic and language. So, I mean, I don't think either one of those are very findable in terms of a
I feel
browsing
like on a
pattern.
college campus, the people in the data systems and the philosophy department are very different people.
But they're both reading my book, Guthrie.
It's true. I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's got my books. I think at one point, I'm looking it up here. Um, one of my books is like ranks really high in let's see, well, in like medical psychology or something. It's like, what?
There you go.
you know well, for instance, my best-selling book often does best in desktop publishing, which is not
That's not even a
it's
term that
not what the
is used anymore,
right.
really. I
Who
mean,
uses that term? And
I've
my
never
book
heard of it.
doesn't have anything to do with desktop publishing.
oh, that's
So
so cute. My first job was in desktop publishing.
Are you
That's
are you talking about me not knowing about desktop publishing?
I think a lot of people don't know about
Yeah, I
desktop.
mean that's a retro term at this point.
What is it?
It's basically
You don't know?
layout for print design.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But
It's
it
like
was a really popular term in like
very popular
the
term in
90s,
the
the late
90s.
90s.
Right, and but now that everyone's just using InDesign, it's it's
I
the
mean,
InDesign is desktop publishing.
yeah, InDesign was something that came out of a product called Quark.
hey, I know
And
Quark.
well, Quark is a desktop publishing, as was even further back than that, you would have had something like PageMaker. So Quark and PageMaker sort of
God,
birthed what
I
is now
remember all
InDesign.
these things.
Yeah, me too. I I used to teach people how to use those things, and
You
now
did?
totally useless skills that I still, or like Corel Draw, which used to,
Oh,
that was what
Corel
was
Draw.
before
That was a big
Illustrator.
one.
Yeah. Oh,
What's
so many things.
Susan? What's
I
the most
used,
archaic software situation that you used to teach or know of?
wow. Well, I don't want to really answer that honestly because then people will know how old I am.
Windows Vista, right? That's as far back as you go.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking up. Yeah, what my most recent book is listed in medical books psychology.
There you go.
It's like I don't
Talk
understand
about brain science.
medical books. So yeah, you're right. People don't use Amazon. They don't use that. So that's
But Amazon uses them, and that's the crux of the whole thing, right? Like, not everything is intended for all audiences, and Amazon did not, I mean, from what I can see of what they constructed, they did not construct that categorization system to work for the users of Amazon, but it does help them in terms of making related books go together in other features, and that's where it becomes more important.
I wonder if it's different because if you think about how Amazon organizes stuff, right? They do warehouse. So like your book has to be in a section, right? Now in the digital world, it's kind of like quantum quantum theories where your book can be in both places at the same time, right? It is both psychology or it is both philosophy and in like information hardware.
Right. It's a polyhierarchy.
But with like a book in a warehouse, it's a physical thing, and you don't want to have multiple like repositories of that because it's inefficient. So
Right.
it has to, if you think of the classic like Barnes and Noble, like right, it, like what sections, right? It has to be in a section, and so you only get one. And so for things in the physical world, they kind of have to you gotta be somewhere.
And I bet it has, I mean, I would bet it has nothing to do at all with category at
You
that
mean
point.
how they have it in the warehouse?
Yeah.
Well, we would
Mm.
like to hear from someone who works
Yeah, I
at
think that would
Amazon
be super cool.
about about in the warehouse. Where is Abby's book?
Right. Well, my
Is
book
it?
is not in the warehouse, so there's the answer.
Oh,
Because
it's not.
no, because my book is print on demand. So
All
it
right.
comes
Well
out of
then,
a printer
all
when
right.
it's
Then why
ordered.
don't we can ask where's my book in the warehouse
Yeah.
then? Because we're not print on demand.
Abby, do you know about Amazon's warehouses?
No.
They're really, really, really cool.
I mean, they're robot manned, right? Like, don't they have
Yeah, so
robots that pick things up and
in the
bring
new
the packers the
ones,
things?
yeah, so have you ever been into and I don't know if people have been this into like a huge like maybe like a college library where they have the bookshelves that slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for those who I'm not know what I'm talking about, think of a normal like grocery store aisle, right? And between each aisle, you have to have a room for people to walk. Well, if all the aisles are on wheels, you only need one row because then if you want to get to someone, you just literally move. You just it's like Moses, like parting the shelves.
The book sees.
Yeah, and so they do that. So they do the same thing, except they just use these kind of like it's not really a shelf. It's more like a stand. That's maybe like 4 feet by 4 feet by like 10 feet tall, and it has a bunch of stuff in it. And that stand is on a little robot. And so when an order needs to go out, let's say you're carrying Susan's book, that's on your stand, and it's like, okay, that's called. And so the little robot gets a little chirp signal, and all little, it kind of does like a little, remember the game where there's one square that's empty and you got to move things around
Yeah.
to make the picture? So it kind of does that, and then it works, it gets out and goes to the person, it's still a person, who's putting the things in the box.
Right.
And so the person looks, and he's got 3 little robots there, and they have the boxes right in front of them of all of the 3 things they're supposed to grab. They put it in the box, throw it down the conveyor belt, and then they fill the next order.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. But that's what that's kind of how Amazon does it. So I'm sure it's all done by barcode, and I'm sure there's lots of really advanced analytics and stuff they do.
Yeah, you guys gotta track down the right person to get them on the show to talk about this.
Susan, you got Amazon connections.
I do have Amazon connections. So
Yeah,
let's make a note of that, and
them in a
we will
podcast.
find someone
they
at
probably can't divulge
Amazon.
their super secret trade secrets, but maybe
They
can
probably
talk
won't tell us.
Yeah,
how
they'll talk
they
in
do it.
generalities. They made the
that-
video public, so they gotta.
Yeah, that still doesn't mean they're going to tell us how they find a book in the warehouse.
So okay, Abby, what? So obviously, besides I don't know the fame and glory and money of information architecture, the sexy world that it is.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, we saw her having a conversation with Al Gore about it.
That's true.
Okay.
I mean, I got that far, which is
Okay.
pretty awesome.
So besides obviously the glitz and glamour, what is it? Why do you? Because you like information architecture so much. Because I, for example, when I was in college, I decided to do economics, and I like economics, and because like efficient things are better things. Like it literally makes the world a better place if you have a system that's more efficient. But why do you like information architecture so much?
I think that I'm really obsessed with the idea of clarity. I just think that a lack of clarity gets in the way of people's intentions so much that I feel as if I've been given the ability to see through a lot of the like anxiety of looking at something that is inherently messy and being able to see like glimmers of what could be clarified. And I just find that really exciting. Like I like helping people to reach their goals, and I feel like often there's a lot of kind of mess in between what they have and what they want to accomplish. And I think cleaning that up and kind of helping people to organize themselves so that they can get things done just makes a lot of sense to me. It's something that I've always been good at, and I've always kind of seen it as a gift that I can give to other people.
So when you get a new project, are you more excited about a project that needs a little bit of work or something that's a complete disaster? What
No,
excites you?
I want a complete disaster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I generally do not. Well, first, I generally don't get offered positions that aren't a complete disaster because information architecture is practiced by people of all sort of walks of life and occupations. And because of that, if it's just a small deal, it's usually something that somebody else can take care of and doesn't have enough anxiety about that they're looking for an expert. So just off the cuff, it's the kinds of things that tend to find their way to me are the bigger messes. And yeah, I think it's funny, like at the beginning of most of the projects that I'm on, my clients are almost like convinced that I'm going to walk away once I actually get into it because like, oh yeah, well, what about this? And how about this? And we've got 5 of these and it's in 12 languages and we have thousands of this. And I just am like, bring it on. This is exactly what I like to do.
That's pretty awesome.
Do you find though that I would think there would be that the organizations that need you most don't call you because I don't think organizations often realize that they have as big a problem as they have, and that they're, I think I was thinking when you were talking before about this whole idea of people measuring the wrong things, I find in my work, people get very caught up in measuring. The metrics are very important. And so they base everything they're doing around the measuring, but they're not measuring things that are of real import and value and usefulness
Because they
to
don't
them.
want to.
Or they can't.
Or
You
they
know,
Or they
don't,
can't.
like how do you measure trust? How do you measure yeah, lifetime health of a relationship? I mean, there's so many things that are just inherently difficult to measure. How do you measure understanding, really? I mean, other than through behavior. And ultimately, if you start measuring it through behavior, does it not become a watered down action as opposed to the thing that you were looking to measure to begin with? So I think that I think you're right, Susan. Like the organizations that probably need me most don't know that they need information architecture assistance.
yeah, yeah,
I
and
do
so,
find that it comes from the middle up for the most part.
yeah,
Like there's always
yeah.
somebody that either they're coming from an engineering perspective or a marketing perspective or a product manager or a designer that is like, yo, this is I can't do my job because this thing is in the way. And this thing that's in the way, this mess that we have, is something that I think is attributed to an issue of information architecture. And they have had the privilege of kind of been being educated on that subject and know those words. And that's the path that the people find me via. And that's fine because right now there's only one of me. But I think that people that are selling information architecture services in general do run into that problem space of like, how do you how do you educate the world on a problem that they all have, but they don't know that they have?
I mean, I know
Yeah.
a lot of people, like friends of mine, who work for a lot of companies whose corporate culture breeds these kind of problems.
Oh yeah,
And
acronym town.
yeah, and of course the company doesn't want to admit that they have like huge structural problems.
Hmm.
But like if you actually ask the people on the ground who have to deal with this every single day, like and there's just so it's just like constant problems because you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole into like a garbage can and
Right.
then like the garbage can has to like fly to outer space. It just it just is there's just
Yeah.
nothing is working.
So Abby, what do you do when someone brings you in and they're bringing you in for, because they would like help with this little information architecture issue. And when you get there, you realize that's, I mean, you can work with them on that, but that's not really what they need, right? They actually have a much larger problem. What
Um,
do you tell them?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I try to take care of most of that in the upfront kind of like crafting of an engagement. I try not to walk into situations that I feel are overly tactical for that reason. Like if somebody calls me and says something like, we have this one feature of our website that we need to work on the IA of. Like, I'm
Mhm.
very unlikely to continue with that sales call without kind of trying to bring them up a level or five in terms of how that thing fits into the rest of the ecosystem. Because often what I do find is that, that's just a symptom of a much larger disease. And then I'll try to frame the assignment from the highest level that I think I can actually achieve. And not be afraid to, walk away if it's not something that they're willing to deal with at a level that I think will actually solve the problem. Like if they're like, yeah, 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 no, we know it's actually a disease and it's, we're about to lose our left arm from it,
But
but
we
we
just
just
want
want
you
you
to
to,
put the Band-Aid
yeah,
on,
we just
please.
want you
Yes.
to like paint our nails. It's like, no, I'm not interested in that kind of work. And those things do happen occasionally, but I think that that's the job of a consultant to sort of only go after the work that you think you can really see a lasting effect that you want to be proud of what you did, you know.
All right. So what's the newest thing that you're working on?
Recently, I've been working on a topic called collaborative information architecture, and really, I think that it came out of well, two things. One, in in my early career, I spent a lot of time at my desk alone making navigational taxonomies and then taking my documents to my client or my colleagues and saying, look, this would be so much better if we just did X. And then I got thrown up on in terms of feedback and arguments and people not agreeing with the way that I had done things. And then I went back to my desk and was kind of stuck in this constant revision cycle. So I had that kind of as my early experience. And then since publishing the book, I would say the number one thing that people ask me about is really, okay, how do I sell this to my organization? How can I involve other people in these decisions? How can I like avoid that awful feeling when you do something and you put a lot of time towards it and then people just reject it because it's not what they thought or what they would have done? So I started to really become interested in this idea that information architecture is a practice that is done by people from kind of all backgrounds and skill sets, and because of that we all inherently have opinions on how it should be done. And so if we do it together collaboratively as opposed to singularly and then presented as sort of the end-to-end solution, like could we have more effect? And for the last couple of years I've been practicing that way in terms of my consulting life, and I've finally started to really think about it as a subject that I might be able to share with others. And so this summer I worked on a webinar for UIE called Collaborative Information Architecture, and yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of digging into that a little bit more.
How is it different?
It's really getting people into the idea of facilitation around activities that are really digging into talking about language and structure. So in a lot of cases, I've seen this happen in a lot of meetings where somebody will say, "Oh, this is just a semantic argument," and they'll kind of like use that as an opportunity to parking lot something. I would say that I would like to encourage semantic arguments. I think that if we had more conversations about the language that we use, we would make more progress more efficiently with the people that we work with, and we'd be able to get to an end result much quicker. And so it's a lot about facilitation skills, and it's also about kind of unburdening the IA practitioner from having to own all of the decision making on a project and learning how to share that. And I think that comes from kind of two places. One is reminding people that you might be an expert in leading people through an information architecture exercise, and you might be an expert at drawing diagrams of taxonomies, but no one has like in their brain all of the different structures that would be perfect for every given context, for every given organization. That just doesn't exist. So really inviting people who practice IA to remember that it is the process that's the most important, and that they are going through that process as well. So they're not going to be less of an expert if they don't know the answer on the first day of how to organize things. I get a lot of questions from people that are like, oh, I'm designing this homepage for this type of organization. Should I organize it this way or this way? And, unfortunately, my answer to them is always like, well, it really depends. It depends on what your intention is. It depends on who your organization wants to be when they grow up. Like there's a lot of things that you actually need to answer. So it's not just kind of like an off the shelf, oh, let me match up. You are this kind of business and you are designing this kind of thing. So alphabetical, that's the way to do it. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like some of the various design strategies that we just did a course on, where there's not like hard rules. It's about the process.
Right. Yeah. It's Richard Saul Wurman who coined the term information architect back in the 70s. He said that we're on a journey from not knowing to knowing. And I think that that's something that I try to remember when I start a new project, because at the beginning, it is a really anxious time when you're looking at a huge mountain in front of you that is this thing that you're going to have to tackle. It's really easy to just jump to solution land and be like, oh, I could just do it this way. I could just do it that way. But I think sitting with that discomfort and then sharing that discomfort with other people so you can come to a result together, I think it's a much more productive way to practice.
I think that people really struggle with that, especially if you're working with, in my experience, if I'm working with programmers, developers, software engineers.
Those guys are like the best at semantic arguing.
They go into like, in your book, you have this section on thinking about nouns and verbs. Mm-hmm. And in our conceptual model course, I talk about deciding on when you're doing design, deciding on what the user objects should be in the interface. And
Yep.
I talk and we go through some exercises where we have people identify from like their scenario or their task analysis, nouns and verbs.
Yep.
I always make the joke, Mrs. McGillicuddy told you in third grade that you'd need to know about grammar and when you were all grown up, and that moment has now arrived,
Yeah. No, totally.
because a lot of times I'll have people in my classes and they'll go, nouns,
Yeah. What's a
verbs. I mean,
noun?
they're
Yeah.
not even sure. But anyway, we go through
Predicate,
this exercise. What?
participle, predicate, participles. I know nothing but like all my friends are either like economists or English majors.
Oh, okay. So the English
Past participle.
past, yeah, dangling participle. So
Hmm.
we go through this process where identify nouns and verbs, and then it comes the moment of making some decisions about given this set of people, the people who you're designing the product for, and giving the kinds of things they want to do, right? Uh, and how many of those things there are that they would have to deal with, and on and on. Um, you decide what are going to be the major objects that we're going to make sure are very clear in the interface when we design the interface.
Right.
And there's not one answer to that. I mean, some decisions about what the objects should be and what they are and what they aren't and how they relate to each other. Some of those decisions lead you to an interface that is easier to learn and easier to use, right? And fits better. But there's no one right answer, right?
Right.
And so when we'll do this for instance, when I'm doing a workshop and I'll have teams and the teams will come up with, I mean, and I've rigged it because I've got a particular case study they're working on, right? And so there are, some likely objects that almost all the teams come up with, but then there's variations,
Mm-hmm.
and it drives them crazy. Sometimes they're like, no, what's the right answer?
Right.
And it's like, well, there isn't a right answer. It depends on whether, your team thought that this was more important or that was more important, or the users would tend to do this more or that more. And of course, you could get data on that and therefore narrow down your choices of which object design you picked. But people kind of struggle with this,
Yeah.
Not only it depends, but just that there's more than one good way to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And like so I'm an economist. I have people come up to me, and we'll be talking about economics and stuff. They're like, so what's your advice? What's the best thing for the economy? And it's
The
like,
one
well,
best thing.
it really depends what your goal is, right? Yeah.
Right.
So there's so are you talking about the United States economy? Are you talking about the global economy? Are you talking about the economy for like manufacturing workers? Because and a lot of times in economics, right? It's should we eat more of this, or should we eat more of this? Should we do more of this?
No, but I mean, that's a perfect example too. Like,
Yeah.
let's say that I'm a nutritionist and somebody
Yeah.
walks up to me and
Exactly.
says, "Should I eat more of this?" It's like, well, that really depends a lot on, your metabolism and your heredity and the way
And
that
there's
you
always too
process things.
much.
And yeah, there's always too much. I feel like, the funny thing about people being uncomfortable with there being more than one way to organize their information is that same thing applies to everything. It's like there's more than one way. They say there's more than one way to skin a cat for a reason. It's applicable to so many different things in our life. I think that, it really comes down to people are just incredibly unsure when it comes to uncertainty. They're very, which is pretty meta. Um, but you know what I mean? Like people are just uncomfortable when they don't know if it's right and is this the right way? And earlier, Susan, we were talking about measurement, and I feel like measurement does have a place, and that's where the place for measurement is in my mind. It's like, is the thing that you decided to do working? And are the metrics that you chose to measure the effectiveness of that solution actually measuring the effectiveness of that solution? Or are they measuring other kind of vanity things that you're just attaching to measurement of that solution? So I think, the first step is to get people comfortable with the idea of like, well, first is like, as the expert, I don't have the answer, but I can help you get there. Second is, once we get there, that might be the answer, but there's still other ways that we could do this. And then the third is to actually measure those things and land on them. I mean, I think that the rise of A/B testing has been really amazing for the kind of like maturity of the web, because we're actually able to do some of those things and say like, we don't know, there's these 2 or 3 ways, and we're going to measure them head to head and see what happens.
It's a much harder and more nuanced sell. It just sounds so much better if you have a magical pill. Just
Oh my gosh.
take this
Yeah.
pill and everything will be great.
I wish I had an IA store that I could drive to and be like, I'm looking for a homepage for a pharmaceutical company. Let me buy that taxonomy. But I have never seen two that looked alike at the end of the day. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, actually it is kind of funny because I think all three of us, I mean, even though we're in kind of different worlds, we all deal in worlds that depend that where the answer is almost always it depends. And the
yeah.
only place it doesn't is maybe Susan when she's doing some brain stuff because all brains are the same. But how you implement that depends on what you want. So for example, like reading comprehension, right? So you actually, if you have a longer line length,
hmm
people read faster that way. But
To a certain extent,
but
right?
people,
Like that does have a break point with the line length thing.
I think so. You'd have to ask Susan.
I mean, I'm guessing if
I'm
you have
guessing if you have
a
to like
five,
turn your head.
yeah, there's a range in which the line length
But
uh
people prefer shorter line
shorter.
lengths,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, well, and what do you want? And almost always it's going to be like make people happy. So you go with a reasonable line length. But so it's yeah. So we deal in these shades of gray.
Yeah. The whole world is like that.
All right, so here's what I learned. I learned that the fact that my office is usually messy is a good thing because
If it works for you,
a
it's a good
mess
thing.
is a good thing. Well, actually, with Guthrie's influence, my office is a lot less messy than it was before. But no, I learned that that's that their stuff is messy. That information architecture is not about coming up with the best way, the one best way to organize information. And that we should go, the three of us need to start that company that will automatically organize all of our files for us.
We do not have enough programming chops
No.
between
No.
the
We can
three of us.
hire programming chops.
Yeah, we're gonna need some
Okay.
we're gonna need
Okay.
some
So that
programmers.
I never have to go through what I did in the last 2 weeks again. Um, but I do feel very righteous now, like because I went through that and everything's organized and I worked hard at it. So that actually, that's a good
The
feeling.
crucible of
I
training.
think the test of that system is gonna be, what does it look like in 6 months?
Well, so here's the thing that I actually have faith in. So she had a very, very, very messy office, and we did the same thing except in a physical space with
We
her
did.
office.
Yeah,
And it has been 8 months, a year,
almost a year. Yeah,
and it is still clean.
Oh,
yeah,
that's great. So
yeah,
you did it right. You paid attention to whatever your patterns are and paid attention to
Guthrie
longevity of
did
the
it right.
solution.
Yeah, he did it right because he's the systems guy.
I am
That's
the
what I have
systems
to
guy.
say.
I like systems.
Abby, thank you so much for talking to us.
Hey,
Hey,
thanks.
Abby.
This was fun.
This was
So if people
interesting.
want to learn more and get involved in the world of information architecture, what are some suggestions that you have?
Well, one would be if you're real nerdy on it, you can join the Information Architecture Institute at iainstitute.org. I am a loving member of that organization. We have an annual event every year called World Information Architecture Day. It takes place all over the world.
Yeah,
So
we spoke at the one in Milwaukee last winter.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I was really happy to see Milwaukee get on the map last year. So hopefully they'll do it again this year. But if not, I'm sure you'll get invited to another location. We have I think over 60 locations coming up in
Yeah.
2017. So a lot of languages, a lot of context in terms of where the organizers are coming from and how they're applying IA. So I find that to be really interesting. And then if you want to keep up with what I'm working on, I can be found at abbytheia.com.
Cool.
And I would say that everyone should read her book because it's easy to read and it's very interesting and very accessible. How to Make Sense of Any Mess. Abby Covert. Hey, stay in touch with us, okay?
Yeah, you guys too. This has been really fun.
All
Yeah.
right. Now, Guthrie, I'm going to remind everyone
Yes.
that if they like our podcast, they should subscribe to it and they should tell other people and they should rate it, like on iTunes or wherever it is that they're listening, because the rating really helps get the word out about the podcast.
And I should say this again, like I should really say this every week. So at the moment, we're not even getting paid to do this because we don't have sponsors yet. So we literally are just doing it for the fans. So you better appreciate it. So we're doing it. We're doing it only for you.
Well, we have fun doing it
We
too.
have fun doing it too. Again, our website is theteamw.com. You can send an email if you have suggestions for upcoming shows at info@theteamw.com. Abby, thank you so much. This is great.
Thanks, guys.
Susan, I will talk to you again soon. And to everyone listening, thanks so much. We'll catch you next week.